You wake up, reach for your phone, and before your feet even touch the floor, your mind has already made dozens of decisions about what is true. A headline, a comment, a rumor, a stranger's opinion wrapped in confidence. Something inside you quietly whispers, "That sounds right." You don't stop to investigate. You don't have time. Life keeps moving, and your brain keeps choosing what to believe. But have you ever wondered how many of those beliefs were never really yours? Not because you're unintelligent, not because you're gullible, but because your mind was never designed to chase truth above everything else. It was designed to help you survive. And sometimes, survival has very little to do with reality. That's an uncomfortable thought. We like to believe we're rational creatures, carefully weighing evidence before reaching conclusions. We picture ourselves as independent thinkers, immune to manipulation, capable of seeing through deception. Yet history keeps telling the same story, over and over again. Entire civilizations have embraced myths that shaped empires. Brilliant minds have defended ideas that later collapsed under the weight of evidence. Ordinary people, good, thoughtful people, have believed things that weren't true, sometimes for generations. The unsettling part isn't that they believed lies. It's that they believed them together. There is something strangely comforting about sharing the same illusion as everyone around you. It feels safe, familiar, human. The greatest fear isn't usually being wrong. It's being alone. Think back to a moment when you realized something you had believed for years wasn't true. Maybe it was a family story that turned out to be exaggerated. Maybe it was a political opinion, a religious assumption, or even the way you saw yourself. Remember that feeling? It wasn't just surprise. It felt like part of your identity had quietly cracked open. That's because beliefs don't simply live in your mind. They become part of who you think you are. And once a belief becomes identity, questioning it feels less like learning and more like losing a piece of yourself. This is where the mystery begins. If truth is so valuable, why does the human mind resist it so fiercely? Why do false stories spread faster than careful evidence? Why can one emotionally charged lie travel across the world while the truth struggles to leave the room? The answer isn't hidden inside politics or social media alone. It reaches much deeper. It begins hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before smartphones, newspapers, or even writing itself existed. Picture a small group of early humans gathered around a fire beneath an endless night sky. Their world was filled with uncertainty. Every rustling bush could hide a predator. Every stranger might be an enemy. Every unfamiliar sound demanded an immediate decision. There wasn't enough time to investigate every possibility. The human brain evolved to make fast judgments, not perfect ones. If your ancestors heard movement in the grass and assumed it was a predator, they might waste a little energy running away. But if they assumed it was harmless when it wasn't, they never got another chance to learn from the mistake. Over thousands of generations, evolution favored minds that erred on the side of caution. Survival rewarded speed more than accuracy. That ancient wiring never disappeared. Today the predators have changed. Instead of lions, we face uncertainty, social rejection, financial instability, public embarrassment, and information overload. Yet the same brain still scans constantly for patterns, threats, and certainty. It would rather accept an imperfect answer than remain in uncomfortable uncertainty. Certainty feels safe. Doubt feels dangerous. And that's exactly where lies find their opening. A lie doesn't always succeed because it's convincing. Often it succeeds because it offers relief. Relief from confusion, relief from complexity, relief from the exhausting burden of saying I don't know. The strange irony is that truth is often messy. It comes with contradictions, exceptions, and unanswered questions. Reality rarely fits into neat stories. But our minds love stories because stories reduce chaos into something understandable. Long before science explained lightning, people imagined angry gods throwing bolts from the heavens. Before medicine uncovered invisible bacteria, entire communities blamed mysterious spirits for disease. These explanations were inaccurate, yet they gave people something even more valuable than facts. They gave meaning. And human beings have always hungered for meaning almost as much as food. This is one of the ideas explored by historian Yuval Noah Harari. He argues that what truly separated Homo sapiens from every other species wasn't physical strength or extraordinary intelligence alone. It was our remarkable ability to create shared stories. Money is, in many ways, a story. Nations are stories. Corporations are stories. Laws, traditions, reputations, even the invisible lines we call borders, exist because millions of people collectively believe they exist. That doesn't make them useless. Quite the opposite. These shared beliefs allow strangers to cooperate on a scale no other animal can achieve. A person in New York trusts a piece of paper represents value, because millions of others trust it too. Investors place billions into companies they've never physically seen. Entire legal systems function because people collectively agree to follow rules that exist only in language and memory. Human civilization is built on shared imagination. And that's both our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. Because once the brain becomes capable of believing useful stories, it also becomes vulnerable to believing harmful ones. The same mental machinery that allows civilizations to flourish can also spread fear, prejudice, conspiracy, propaganda, and manipulation. The mechanism itself isn't good or evil. It's simply human. History offers countless reminders. Ancient rulers understood something modern marketers still understand remarkably well. People rarely follow facts alone. They follow narratives. A king wasn't merely a political leader. He was often described as chosen by heaven itself. His authority wasn't protected only by soldiers but by belief. Challenge the story and suddenly even the strongest empire begins to shake. Centuries later, revolutions weren't ignited solely by economic hardship. They were fueled by competing visions of reality, stories about justice, freedom, destiny, and identity. The battlefield always existed twice. Once in the physical world and once inside the human imagination. The philosopher doesn't first conquer land. Someone first conquers belief. And belief, once planted deeply enough, can survive even when evidence begins pushing against it. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to change someone's mind with facts alone? Maybe you've experienced it during a family dinner, an online discussion, a conversation with a lifelong friend. You present careful evidence expecting curiosity. Instead, the other person becomes defensive, their voice grows firmer. They search for reasons to dismiss your information before fully hearing it. What's fascinating is that you probably do exactly the same thing. So do I. Not because we're dishonest, because our brains interpret disagreement as something much older than an intellectual debate. Deep inside, disagreement can feel like a threat to belonging. For most of human history, belonging wasn't optional. Being rejected by your tribe often meant death. Food was shared, protection was shared, knowledge was shared. To lose your community wasn't merely lonely. It was dangerous. Our ancestors didn't survive by always being objectively correct. They survived by staying connected. That ancient instinct still echoes through modern life in ways we rarely notice. Every time we hesitate before expressing an unpopular opinion, every time we quietly agree with a group despite private doubts, every time we feel a knot in our stomach after being criticized, we're hearing whispers from an evolutionary past that never truly disappeared. Maybe that's why social acceptance can feel more rewarding than being right. Maybe that's why people sometimes defend beliefs they've secretly started questioning. Because changing your mind isn't just updating information, it's risking your place within the people who helped shape your identity. And that raises an even deeper question. What if the greatest lies aren't the ones forced upon us? What if they're the ones we willingly protect, because they make us feel connected, significant, and safe? If that's true, then the real battle isn't between truth and deception. It's between two ancient needs that have always lived inside the human heart. The need to know what's real, and the need to belong. The remarkable thing is that these two needs don't always point in the same direction. Sometimes they walk hand in hand. Other times, they pull us toward entirely different futures. And understanding why that happens requires us to look beyond history and into the hidden architecture of the human mind itself, where emotion quietly shapes perception, long before logic ever gets a chance to speak. If you could watch your own brain in the split second before you accepted an idea as true, you might be surprised by what you wouldn't see. You wouldn't see a tiny scientist carefully examining every piece of evidence. You wouldn't see a calm judge weighing facts with perfect neutrality. What you would see is something far older, faster, more emotional. Long before your conscious mind begins explaining why you believe something, another part of your brain has already asked a different question. Does this feel safe? That single question has quietly shaped human history. Neuroscientists have spent decades uncovering something that philosophers suspected long ago. Reason is not the captain of the ship. More often, it is the storyteller. Emotions, instincts, memories, and unconscious associations begin steering first. Logic frequently arrives afterward, crafting a convincing narrative that makes our decision feel rational. That's one of the strangest tricks the mind ever plays on itself. We don't simply believe ideas. We become attorneys for them. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind starts gathering evidence after you've already made up your opinion? One article suddenly seems trustworthy, while another feels suspicious. One expert appears brilliant, while another somehow loses credibility. It's almost as if your brain hires an entire legal team whose only purpose is defending the belief you already hold, not discovering the truth, protecting the identity. Psychologists call part of this confirmation bias, but the name barely captures how deeply it influences everyday life. Think about someone who believes people are fundamentally selfish. Every rude stranger confirms it. Every act of kindness becomes an exception. Another person believes humanity is basically good. They witness the very same events and reach the opposite conclusion. The world didn't change, the lens did. And once you understand that, something unsettling begins to emerge. Most of us aren't experiencing reality directly. We're experiencing interpretations. Every human being walks through life wearing invisible glasses, polished by childhood, culture, trauma, education, relationships, and memory. Two people can witness the exact same conversation and walk away convinced that entirely different things happened. Neither one is consciously lying, yet both feel absolutely certain. Certainty is one of the brain's greatest illusions. This becomes even more fascinating when we look at memory. Most people think of memory as a recording device, like an old video camera storing events exactly as they happened. But your brain doesn't archive experiences that way. Every time you remember something, you're rebuilding it. Shift. Emotions blend into facts. New experiences quietly rewrite old ones. In other words, your memories aren't fossils, they're living stories. And stories evolve. This explains why siblings often remember the same childhood in completely different ways. It explains why eyewitness testimony, despite sincere confidence, can be surprisingly unreliable. It explains why people can spend years arguing over events that each person genuinely believes happened exactly as they describe. Truth becomes filtered through memory. Memory becomes filtered through emotion. And emotion becomes filtered through identity. Without realizing it, we're editing our personal history every day. Carl Jung believed that much of what governs our lives remains hidden beneath conscious awareness. He described the unconscious not as a dark basement, filled only with forgotten memories, but as a vast landscape influencing our perceptions without asking permission. Perhaps you've experienced it. You instantly trust someone you've just met, even though you can't explain why. Or you immediately dislike another person, despite having no logical reason. You tell yourself you're simply following your instincts. But where did those instincts come from? Often, they emerge from patterns your unconscious recognized long before your conscious mind caught up. The brain is constantly predicting reality. It isn't waiting for information, it's guessing. Every second, billions of neurons compare expectations with incoming sensory data, creating a seamless experience of the world. That predictive ability makes life efficient. Without it, every familiar face, every spoken word, every doorway and staircase would require enormous mental effort to process. Prediction is one of the greatest gifts evolution ever gave us. But every gift has a shadow. When the brain predicts too confidently, it begins seeing what it expects rather than what actually exists. A rumor becomes evidence. An assumption becomes certainty. A stereotype becomes reality. And suddenly, the lie doesn't feel like a lie anymore. It feels obvious. That's why intelligent people are not immune to deception. In some situations, intelligence can actually strengthen false beliefs. A highly analytical mind often becomes exceptionally skilled at constructing sophisticated arguments for conclusions it reached emotionally in the first place. Knowledge doesn't always reduce bias. Sometimes it decorates it. History is filled with brilliant scholars defending ideas that later appeared absurd. Doctors once rejected hand-washing. Scientists dismissed revolutionary discoveries. Philosophers confidently explained realities we now know were mistaken. Their intelligence wasn't the problem. Their certainty was. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once suggested that humans often seek comforting interpretations rather than unbearable truths. He wasn't arguing that truth lacks value. He was pointing towards something more uncomfortable. Sometimes illusion protects us. Consider the stories people tell themselves after profound loss. Someone says, "Everything happens for a reason." Another believes their loved one is watching over them. Someone else tells themselves that suffering will eventually reveal a hidden purpose. Can science verify these beliefs? Not always. Yet many people survive unbearable grief, because those beliefs provide enough hope to keep living. This is where the conversation becomes more complicated. Not every false belief is destructive. Some function like emotional scaffolding. Children often begin life believing their parents can solve almost any problem. That belief isn't entirely accurate, but it provides security during years when fear could otherwise become overwhelming. Confidence itself often grows from stories we later outgrow. The challenge is recognizing when a helpful story quietly transforms into a prison. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about examining our own judgments because he understood something timeless. Suffering often begins not with events themselves, but with the meanings we attach to them. Lose a job, one person concludes, "I'm worthless." Another concludes, "This is painful but temporary." The external event is identical. The internal narrative changes everything. Our lives are shaped less by reality alone than by the stories we continuously tell ourselves about reality. Perhaps the most dangerous lies are not the dramatic conspiracies that dominate headlines. Perhaps they're the silent sentences we repeat every day. I'm not enough. People like me never succeed. No one truly understands me. I'll always fail. These aren't merely thoughts. Over time, they become identities. And identity has extraordinary power. Your brain works tirelessly to remain consistent with who it believes you are. If you deeply believe you're unlucky, you'll notice every disappointment while overlooking countless moments of quiet fortune. If you believe you're incapable of change, every setback becomes proof that nothing will ever improve. The mind loves consistency, even when consistency hurts. Buddhist philosophy has explored this for centuries, through the idea that attachment creates suffering. We cling not only to possessions or relationships, but to identities, opinions, and narratives. We grip them so tightly that questioning them begins to feel like threatening our own existence. What if the greatest freedom isn't finding the perfect belief? What if it's becoming less attached to needing every belief to define you? That possibility changes everything. Because the moment your identity loosens its grip on certainty, curiosity quietly returns. Curiosity asks different questions. What if I'm missing something? What evidence would change my mind? What am I afraid of discovering? Those questions sound simple, but they're extraordinarily difficult, not because they're intellectually demanding, because they're emotionally expensive. The brain burns energy resisting uncertainty. It craves closure. An unfinished puzzle occupies attention. An unanswered question creates tension. That's why conspiracy theories, simplistic ideologies, and absolute worldviews can become so psychologically attractive. They remove ambiguity, they replace complexity with certainty. And certainty, even when false, often feels better than confusion. But reality rarely rewards certainty for long. Reality rewards adaptation. The people who flourish across changing circumstances are not necessarily the ones who are always right. They're the ones willing to revise their beliefs before reality forces them to. That willingness requires humility. Not the kind that pretends to know nothing. The kind that quietly says, I may not be seeing the whole picture. In a world overflowing with opinions, that kind of humility has become surprisingly rare. And perhaps that's why genuine wisdom feels so different from confidence. Wisdom doesn't shout. It listens. It doesn't rush to conclusions. It remains comfortable sitting beside uncertainty, just a little longer than everyone else. Yet today, remaining uncertain has become more difficult than at any other point in human history. Because every device in your pocket, every notification, every algorithm, and every endless stream of information has learned something remarkable about the human brain. It has learned that our deepest psychological vulnerabilities are no longer just features of our evolution. They have become the most valuable resource in the modern world. For most of human history, lies traveled at the speed of conversation. They moved from one village to another, from campfires to marketplaces, from whispered rumors to handwritten letters. Distance acted like a natural filter. Time slowed everything down. Today, neither of those filters exists. The average person now encounters more information in a single day than their ancestors might have processed in weeks. News arrives before it is verified. Opinions spread before they're examined. A single sentence written by a stranger can reach millions before anyone has the chance to ask the most important question of all. Is it actually true? The frightening part isn't just the volume of information. It's that the digital world has become astonishingly good at understanding the emotional shortcuts of the human brain. Social media doesn't reward accuracy, it rewards attention. And attention is captured far more easily by outrage than nuance, by certainty than humility, by fear than patience. A headline that says, "Scientists continue investigating a complex question," rarely goes viral. A headline that declares, "Everything you've been told is a lie," spreads like wildfire, not because people are foolish. Because the brain instinctively notices what feels emotionally urgent. Every notification competes for one limited resource: your attention. The companies building these platforms understand something psychologists have known for decades. Human beings are naturally drawn toward novelty, conflict, surprise, and social validation. Every swipe, every click, every comment becomes part of an invisible feedback loop, slowly teaching algorithms what captures your emotions most effectively. The algorithm isn't asking whether something is true, it's asking whether you'll stay. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. The information surrounding you becomes increasingly familiar. The same ideas appear from different voices. The same beliefs are repeated in different forms. Eventually, repetition itself starts to feel like evidence. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, everyone is saying this, so maybe it's true? That feeling has a name in psychology. but you don't need technical terms to recognize it. The more often we encounter an idea, the easier it feels to process. And the easier something feels to process, the more believable it often becomes. Familiarity quietly disguises itself as truth. That's why advertising works. That's why propaganda works. That's why personal insecurities become stronger the more often we repeat them. The brain confuses repetition with reality. This creates an entirely new kind of challenge. Centuries ago, the greatest danger was having too little information. Today, the danger may be having so much that we stop examining any of it. Every opinion arrives demanding immediate judgment. Every controversy insists you choose a side before understanding the question. Every trend encourages instant certainty. Reflection begins to feel almost rebellious. Perhaps that's one of the greatest paradoxes of modern life. We have unprecedented access to knowledge, yet wisdom remains remarkably scarce. Knowledge fills the mind. Wisdom slows it down. And slowing down has become increasingly difficult. Artificial intelligence is beginning to amplify this challenge in ways we're only starting to understand. It can generate convincing images, realistic voices, persuasive essays, and entirely fictional events that look almost indistinguishable from reality. The line between authentic and artificial grows thinner each year. But maybe AI isn't creating a brand new problem. Maybe it's revealing one that has always existed. Machines can generate convincing falsehoods. Human beings generate convincing meanings. Both require discernment. The real question has never been whether deception exists. The real question is whether we are willing to examine ourselves before judging the world around us. Because every external lie first looks for an internal weakness. It searches for fear, for loneliness, for resentment, for certainty, for hope. The more emotionally charged the subject, the more carefully we must examine our own reactions. When was the last time you paused before sharing something that instantly made you angry? When was the last time you deliberately read an opinion you strongly disagreed with? Not to argue against it, but to understand why another human being could sincerely believe it. Those moments rarely go viral, but they quietly transform the person living them. This may be why genuine self-awareness has become one of the most valuable skills of the 21st century. Not intelligence alone, not education alone. Awareness. The ability to notice your own thoughts without immediately becoming them. To observe an emotional reaction before acting on it. To recognize the strange comfort that certainty provides without allowing it to become your prison. Ancient Stoic philosophers practiced something remarkably similar. They understood that while we cannot always control what enters our minds, we can become more conscious of what we choose to nurture. Between stimulus and response exists a small space. It often feels invisible, yet an entire life can change inside that space. The next time someone challenges one of your deepest beliefs, notice what happens. Does your body tense? Does your breathing change? Do you begin preparing your response before they've even finished speaking? That reaction tells you something profound. Your nervous system has mistaken disagreement for danger. Simply noticing that is powerful. Because awareness interrupts autopilot. And autopilot is where manipulation thrives. Perhaps truth isn't something we permanently possess. Perhaps it's something we continually approach. That idea requires humility, but it also offers freedom. You no longer have to defend every opinion as though your existence depends on it. You no longer have to fear changing your mind. Changing your mind isn't evidence of weakness. Sometimes it's evidence that reality mattered more to you than your ego. There's an old tendency within human nature to believe that certainty equals strength. We admire people who speak with unwavering confidence. We assume they must know something we don't. Yet history repeatedly reminds us that confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. The loudest